Julia. Welcome. It's very good to have you here. Can you start just by introducing yourself, telling a little bit about you and your journey so far in Elixir?
Yes, my name is Julia. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I started coding in 2020 during the pandemic. I did a boot camp. My dad used to be a programmer, so it was also always something like that was on my radar. I originally went to college for design, but ended up working in a bunch of different things, and then eventually I was like, I'm gonna try coding. I also like when I was a teenager, I used to do like templates for blogs, stuff like that. So it was also always something that interested me. So in 2020, I did a boot camp. I originally learned Ruby, and I think because Jose came from the Ruby community, I had already heard about Elixir, but I thought that it would be something that I would learn when I was like a more senior developer because I had just like learned to code and everything, and I thought it wouldn't be a language that I would learn so early in my career. But then after the boot camp, start of 2021, I applied to a bunch of different jobs. And it was mostly full stack or even just front end jobs because since like I came from design, I thought I would go that route. But then I applied to one back end only job, which was an Elixir job. And I applied, I think, only because it was Elixir, because it had like because a Brazilian had created and everything. Like the language interested me, so I was like, oh, that's cool. And also because it was an opening that was like a training program. So before you started working, you would get trained in Elixir for a month before you actually started working. It was only like for juniors, most people having like their first jobs in tech and everything. So I applied to that, and that was the one that I got into. So my first developer job was already in Elixir, and since then I have pretty much only worked with Elixir with like a little bit of like Python and Go like here and there, but it was like very minor systems in companies that I worked for. So yeah, that's how I got into Elixir.
No, cool. That's very interesting. You touched on a couple of points there that I'd like to expand. Because one of the things that we've been talking about in doing these interviews for Alchemy Conf, which you'll be a speaker at. I forgot to say, but if that wasn't obvious yet. But one of the things we've been talking about is that the Elixir community is kind of small still. There's some companies doing it, but like it's not that many companies using Elixir, at least as their main stack yet. Um, so it's interesting that you found a position to Elixir for a junior position, which is first of all something we don't see that much,
Yes.
and also that encompass training. Do you think that was that a Brazilian company? Do you think that's
Yes.
related to being in Brazil, or
It
what do you think about that?
was it was Stone. It's a fintech, a company in Brazil, pretty big fintech company. I think they were positioned kind of uniquely. It was like the boom of the tech sector in 2020, 2021. So they, when I was hired, they actually hired like 30 juniors at the same time to teach Elixir too. So it was very fun because we became kind of a class. Uh, but yeah, they had very passionate leadership at the time. It was like their sort of like banking sector that was kind of like almost like a startup inside a bigger company. So they had like super passionate leadership, and I think that helped. And they had the resources. Unfortunately, they are not even like they are actually transitioning from Elixir now because of changes in leadership. So it's not because like it wasn't performant or it wasn't working out. It's all due to like new leadership comes in. They don't understand the language. They like it's not something they are super familiar with. So they want to switch it out to something they are more familiar with. And I think probably that's the biggest hurdle. It's not like the language is great. I don't think it's hard to be a junior and learn Elixir. It was very like it was not hard for me and most of my peers, like 30 people, they all did great with it, and they are all mostly still working in Elixir. But I think the leadership is the hardest thing to convince, because like those people usually have years of experience and they have like their biases already and they have the things they are familiar with already. So I think that's like the hardest part.
It's interesting because different companies, especially bigger companies I talk to that use Elixir, they all kind of say the same thing, that training people either from juniors or from even senior developers but used to other languages, it's not super hard to train them in Elixir. It's like quite easy to get going. But then we hear stories like the one you're just saying, where oh, but now we're transitioning to something else because maybe, as you said, leadership has experience with another language or tech stack. So going back to your beginning, as you said, in the bootcamp for Ruby, which for the like past 10 years, I don't know how it is exactly right now, but for a long time Ruby was huge in boot camps. The boot camp, there were a lot of boot camps across the world, most of them using Ruby and Rails. Kind of a question from someone that comes from a boot camp for you then, do you think it would be good to have Elixir in these boot camps, and if so, how do we get there?
I think it's complicated. I think honestly, for a language like Elixir, the best thing would be something like Stone did, which was a training that was already kind of attached to a position. Because I do think, like for example, the bootcamp I did, I didn't pay for it because like I was working for them. It was a whole thing, but it was a very expensive bootcamp because if you want to have good teachers, it will be expensive. Like if you want good people teaching, it will be expensive. So if you make people pay for like a very boot camp, a very expensive boot camp in Elixir, but then there aren't any jobs for them to go to, it's not like economically viable. You know, it doesn't make sense. So I think like right now, even Ruby is kind of dying out in boot camps, and a lot of them are switching to JavaScript because there are a lot of positions using like TypeScript or JavaScript Node and everything. So I think it has to be like a balance, because if you want to go to a good boot camp, uh, it's going to be expensive, and you have to have a path after the boot camp. You know.
Yeah. But so what I'm hearing is we need to fight that. We need more jobs with Elixir, which is a conversation been having multiple times, and there's no obvious answer, of course. But in your mind, how do you see that we could like expand the Elixir community to more people, so that more companies are created with Elixir, so then they grow and become these bigger use cases and so on.
I wish I knew. I wish I knew the answer to that, because I would love to keep working with Elixir. But I don't know. I think that we just have to. I think maybe one thing that sometimes we don't do enough. It's because right now Elixir is at a point that like the community is not huge, but there is a community. So it's also easy to just stay inside the community and like preach to the choir, and not like expand, like go to conferences that are more general to present like use cases, stuff like that. So I think that is kind of a way, you know, especially companies that with Elixir you can do a lot with very little. So I think it's always interesting to point that out, especially now that people, tech companies are in an environment that are like cutting a lot of people. They are trying to like diminish basically workforces. And with Elixir, you can do a lot with like a small team, you know.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Let's, yeah, just want to see that happening. Hopefully, yeah. Moving on a little bit. So currently you're working at Turn.io, right? I don't know if that's how
Yes.
you say it, but Just kind of curious of what are you doing with Elixir there, just you specifically or the company as a whole? What's kind of the Elixir experience over there?
So we are an official WhatsApp partner because the WhatsApp API, it's not like most APIs that you can just connect to it like anyone. You can connect to some parts of it, but a lot of it you have to go through business provider BSP, which we are one, and we are the only one that is so completely focused on social impact. So, we do like own NGOs, governments, social impact enterprises, stuff like that. We did like the COVID chatbot for the WHO, for example, in like multiple countries. We work with a lot of like lines for the government of Brazil, for example. So basically, our product is both a help desk for operators and chatbot services, like building chatbots, building like bulk messaging to certain like types of contacts, stuff like that. So it's basically making the WhatsApp experience more like scalable and managing like big numbers of messages through WhatsApp.
Yeah, so based on what you're describing, I assume like you're dealing with the large scale of requests. Is
Very
that
large.
are you using first the question because I didn't ask? Are you using Phoenix there
Yes.
to handle the web requests? And how is that experience in production with a lot of requests? And also, as you mentioned, COVID, probably you see like peak of requests and maybe like a lull where you don't have that as many. How has been Elixir behaving in that environment?
Elixir behaves very well. I wasn't around when they were dealing with the COVID thing. It was like the company was just starting, and the thing I talked about doing a lot with very little. Back then, there were only like three developers, like one front end person and like two backend people, and they were doing like the WHO COVID chatbot. It was basically just like the founders and one more engineer back then. But yeah, generally requests we deal with very well. The only thing that we've had somewhat of a problem with sometimes it's dealing with basically background jobs, like basically we use OBED, and
Mhm.
it has been a journey. Right now it's a lot more stable, but it took us a long time to figure out how to deal with scale because before, around the time that I actually joined the company, they were using Factory, which is like a Ruby thing, and they were running it kind of separately for uh, um, jobs and everything. But when I came to the company, actually, one of my first tasks was to switch a lot of jobs to Open. And since then, like, we learned how to deal with it, but it was a little bit of a bumpy ride.
Curious as well. I don't know if you like how much of you can share or not of what do you think Elixir is giving to the company that other languages wouldn't? Is there anything specifically you're taking advantage of the ecosystem or I don't know, even community?
I think the infra costs, like, it's definitely like it would definitely be a lot more expensive to run with other languages and other like just types of architectures because we are like a company where most of our customers are like social impact. It's not like they can pay that much, for a service. So we have to be very cost aware. We can't just like throw a bunch of like AWS stuff, uh, you know, onto the
Hmm.
product. We have to really be smart with how we architect things and how we take advantage of the beam. And I think that has been like really Elixir has been really great at that. And also, I think developer productivity. We are a small team still. I think it's probably not even like 15 developers at the moment.
Hmm.
And we deal with like millions and millions of messages. So I think it's easier to scale with Elixir than with other languages.
Do you think, based on what you just said, that Elixir is well suited for social impact applications, or it doesn't matter, anything
Uh,
works?
I think it is. I mean, I think that especially if you're gonna have scale. I mean, if you're just building something for your like social impact organization that is not that big, it won't have uh, that much like that many users accessing it every day, then you can probably build it with anything. But if you're hoping to reach scale, Elixir, I think it's a very good option because it's not that much setup at the beginning, so that it's like, oh, like, you don't have, it's good if it's a small application. Like for me, it's good for my weekend projects, but it's also good if you do reach scale.
Hmm. Yeah, good. We're just out here promoting Elixir, or trying to. But moving on to your talk that you're giving in Alchemy Conf, which tickets are for sale, by the way. Um, what can you what do you want to share about the talk you're giving? Maybe no spoilers, but what are the high level points?
So the talk I'm giving is about smart routing of conversations in help desk. It is basically about how we use Elixir to help organizations help more people more quickly, because some of the organizations we deal with, they have like very high stakes. Some of them deal with, for example, domestic violence, or like politically involved people in some countries, like refugees and stuff. So sometimes having responses very fast is super important for some organizations. Some messages, it's okay if they are not delivered super fast. It's okay if like an operator doesn't get the message from the person super fast. But in some cases, it's very important that when the organization gets a message, an operator can see it as fast as possible. So that's a bit of what it talks about and how I used Elixir to do that.
Cool. Excited to see it, and hope lots of people do. Um, before, so was gonna ask. So you just came into Elixir and you explored this solution, and again, kind of hitting the same nail. But did you think of how to approach this solution you're talking about in other languages? Would it be super hard? Do you think Elixir gave you an edge there?
I didn't think about doing it in another language, just because, like, at my job, like at my company,
Hmm.
we pretty much only use Elixir and JavaScript for the front end, so it wouldn't make sense. But I do think it does give me an edge. Stuff like Gen servers and just it being like just the parallelism that Elixir gives you, it's a huge boon when you're talking about fast response times and just routing in general. So, yeah.
Cool. And if nothing else, I think beyond the technical side, it's a project makes a real difference in people that might need it. So that's kind of cool. I think it's something we don't see that often. At least
Yeah.
I don't interact that often. Is that something that drew you to the project? Did it have anything to do with it?
Yeah, it definitely drew me to Turn in general. Before I worked there, I was working for basically banks, and it's not like banks are not important, but it does make me happier to see how my work like directly impacts these organizations. And also because Turn is not a huge company, we do have a lot more access to our customers, and we do know a lot more about how like our work is directly impacting their operations. So I think there's also pretty cool. Like I have very we have very close relationship with our customers, and we hear from them a lot if things are going well, if things are not going well. So sometimes there's also that, but it's cool to see how what you're building is actually getting used and making a difference in people's lives.
Awesome. No, so going back to the beginning a little bit of something you mentioned, you said you're based in Rio de Janeiro. So, and that one of the reasons you got into Elixir is like, oh, this is made by a Brazilian. That sounds like fun. But just wondering, how's the community like over there? Is the Elixir community big, growing in Brazil or in Rio?
I Rio, I won't say it's like a huge spot. I would say São Paulo community is a little bit bigger, but just because São Paulo is also a little bit bigger. But Brazil, I would say, has a pretty active Elixir community, and even, for example, when my company recently opened a position, like there were a lot of Brazilians applying, even though my company is not Brazilian. Like uh, but I do think it is one of the countries that probably has the most Elixir developers, just because it's a big country, but also I think because Jose is Brazilian, a lot of people do get interest because of that. And also, there were like, especially fintech companies, there were, for example, like some, there were quite a few fintech companies. Brazil recently also went through kind of a boom of digital banks. So there was a lot of that being built in Elixir in Brazil.
Okay. So some of these neobanks in Brazil are being built in Elixir?
Yeah.
Didn't know. No, that's cool. Now we need more community events coming out of Brazil as well, so that people have an excuse to visit.
Yes.
Uh, so you mentioned you didn't mention here, but you mentioned on your bio on the that we have for Alchemy Conf that outside of programming, you're also into poetry, dancing, um, some other stuff like that. Do you think there's a connection between the creativity you see there and software development for you? Was that related?
Yeah, I think for me, software development is kind of fun because you do get to be creative, but at the end of the day there's still a bit of objectivity, like it either works or it doesn't. In art, like in poetry, and when I worked in design before, I had a hard time with uh, you know the subjectivity of it all. Like a client likes it, I like it, my boss doesn't like it. Like it can be very subjective, and when you're creating something, like when you're writing, for example, you can be have a lot of self doubt around your work. And it's not like in software development you can't also have self doubt, but if you have something and something is working, then at least you have like proof that you built something, and something that works. So I do think you need creativity to be a good software developer. But at the same time, I also like that for like my day-to-day job, it's not super subjective. At the end of the day, it has to work. The tests have to pass. The client has to use it. So yeah.
Does that mean you're happy that you got out of design, or do you still miss it a little bit?
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't miss working in it. I I love design academically. Studying design, I think it's great. Understanding design, I think it taught me a lot for just my life and how to think about even projects, how to approach projects. But working in design, yeah, I didn't enjoy it, which was why I left.
So you said it helps you with the projects there. So just curious, what sort of thing do you see that it having studied design that influenced how you approach like problem solving in your projects now or in tech in general?
Yeah, it's just because for my schooling basically in tech was like, now I'm actually going to school for computer science again, but it was when I did my boot camp, it was very diminished. We we learned the basics, how to do a very basic application, so we didn't have the time to go into like project management or anything like that. But in design, I did study a lot how to approach a problem, how to brainstorm ideas, how to pick ideas. Design thinking was kind of like buzzword at the time, so we studied all of that, all those techniques. So it definitely has influenced how I think about a problem, and I use a lot of techniques that I learned in design school to build software
I see.
projects.
So you have I was gonna say a very unique path to development, but I guess nowadays is not so unique. There's quite a bit of people coming from that background. I was just wondering if you have any advice that you'd give someone that's new to, well, programming or just programming in Elixir, just for the first time. What you would you tell them?
I think you have to take responsibility for your education, basically. Like, you can't expect people to just hand you everything that you have to learn. And people, I think, learn things in very different ways and like orders. Like, there's no one way for you to learn programming or for you to learn about like computer science. It really depends on how you come to it, what kind of company you're working for, what kind of product you're building. And I think uh, it has to be a balance of trying to learn like foundational things that everyone kind of needs to know, and then learn very specific things that is very that you're going to apply right away to your job. And I think that's kind of the best way to learn, because sometimes if you just study things for, I'm interested in this and I'm going to study it, it's very hard to retain that information if you're not going to use for anything. So I think that's how I always kind of guided my studies. What do I need for my job? I need this. Are there like foundational things for this that I don't understand yet? Then let's study this, and let's study this very specific application that I can will be able to use right away in my job. And for sure that will stick to my mind more than if I just go through a curriculum that is completely divorced from what I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Now, keeping up with his advice, what would you say would be for someone going for, I don't know, if they go for a conference for the first time, or if they have been to a bunch, but if they're going to Alchemy Conf, how do you think they can take the most out of the event, other than going to watch your talk, of course, but other than that, what should they do?
I think these days the hardest thing is to actually pay attention to things, because now it's so easy to just like be on your cell phone or be on your laptop doing stuff that is unrelated and kind of uh, almost lying to yourself that you're paying attention. So I think you have to look at the conference, see what you think is interesting, and then actually pay attention and engage with the talk. Ask questions, go talk to people afterwards. And I think that's one of the biggest things in conferences, is to actually talk to people. Like the first conference I spoke to in Brazil, it was because I had talked to someone at another event like before. So like it's a very cool time to actually make connections and talk to people, see what people are doing in other companies. The last Elixir conference I went to, for me, the most interesting thing wasn't even like something I heard in a talk, but it was hearing people talk about how their teams are kind of structured when we were just talking afterwards, and how people had such like different team structures and things that they liked about it, things that they didn't like about it, and it made me think a lot about like what would we do at the company I work for. So yeah, I think that's the coolest thing about conferences, because the talks are super nice, but you could just watch like a video of them afterwards. But I think especially if you're going in person, the in person interaction is the best part.
Agreed. I think that'll be that. I think that is important. I think that'll be really cool at Alchemy Conf. So really excited to have you there. Thanks so much for joining us here for this chat. We reached the end, but again, we'll see each other in person in not that long
Yeah.
at Alchemy Conf, and hopefully we'll see a bunch of other people there as well.
Yes, I'm excited.